Hey guys, it's Harrison and welcome to the Awkward Sports History Talk. I'm Harrison and this is my good friend Josh. Josh, how you doing?
How we doing? Awkward sports history just got a whole lot more awkward.
Oh, I love the sound of that. Josh, before we get started, just tell me a little bit about your background so the audience knows.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Josh Kapke. I met Harrison at University of Florida. We used to do podcasting together and some on-air radio at ESPN Gainesville, and we go back and forth all day, every day with current events in the world of sports. Obviously, we're putting together one today for some pretty big reasons.
Yeah. Josh and I used to do a segment on ESPN Gainesville called Harp on Sports. It was what was the exact name of it again? It was
The
the
Clash.
podcast was the Clash. That was it. We did a segment on
Yeah.
ESPN Gainesville called The Clash. Don't know why I almost blanked on that. Apologies to ESPN Gainesville, but we also did a podcast called The Pulse of Sports. Clear. Anyway, we're gonna do our own version of that now, as we have a big sports history topic that finally occurred and we want to talk about it. Tom Brady's career is officially part of the history books in full, at least the football on the field part. We don't know if he's going to coach. We know he might be doing analyst on Fox Broadcasting Corporation. Watch out, Greg Olson. Even though you just had a great first, or was it first year or was it second? I forget.
It was his first year, I think, being thrown into the limelight per se. I know he did some Fox broadcasts in years past, but obviously with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman moving on from Fox to ESPN this offseason, a lot of those people from the inside got promoted up, and big shoes to fill. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman, had it well run for Fox for a long time.
Absolutely. And Tom Brady will have the same. For many, he is the greatest of all time. Some just say the best quarterback of all time. Some don't agree. We're going to go with the we agree at this point. And we're going to talk about was essentially the greatest career in the history of football and how it came to an end on February 1st, 2023. It's a long time coming for Brady. The probably one of the more famous parts of him is that he was drafted 199th overall in the sixth round of the 2000 draft at the University of Michigan. Josh, I know you are a bit of an expert on that part of Brady. Why don't you talk?
Yeah, Tom Brady, just the story that he has is pretty magnificent. Obviously, you go way back to when he was drafted. It was just another pick. People, when you watch the draft, people aren't really paying much attention to who gets drafted in the fifth, sixth, and seventh round. And, you don't really find out about where those players are drafted unless they succeed. You go start doing your research and you find out that those guys were late round picks after all. And with Tom Brady, the career he had, obviously, in my opinion, was as close to perfection as you could get. Um, the greatest of all time, I think, goes without saying. In the sport of football, he's just excelled at every aspect of the game, and it's just been an honor to watch him play. And now the last quarterback of my childhood is gone, so
Well, I
it's going to
mean,
be cool though.
Aaron
The
Rodgers is
NFL's in
still
great
technically
hands.
around.
Yeah, and people say that Aaron Rodgers. I think that's a good point. It's just that when I grew up, my dad's a huge Packer fan, so I kind of the first quarterback I ever learned about was Brett Favre, and I
Right,
watched a
right.
little bit of Brett Favre, so I will always count him for me at least as childhood quarterback. But Aaron Rodgers is about as close as it gets. But the league's in great hands now with Lawrence and Burrow and Herbert, Mahomes, Hurts, Josh Allen. All those guys are fantastic. But again, Brady walking away today. A year ago today, he actually announced that he was, possibly stepping away from football.
Which
So I
is
wanted to talk about
crazy.
it
Yeah,
was,
because
yeah, and
we honestly could have been having this discussion 365 days ago, and in 2022, and now we're having it on the exact same day on the calendar year, except a year later. Um, how do you think stuff like that affects the way people perceive a retirement?
yeah. So one thing that kind of stuck out to me about the announcement today was, obviously the big quote, I'm retired, for good this time. But he used the word retired, like I am going to retire in his video today. One thing that I noticed even way back a year ago was
He
when I
didn't
read
use
that
the word
first page
retire.
of the book, he didn't use the word retirement. So even though we kind of thought that he was stepping away, it wasn't one of those things where it felt like for real. This time it does. Last time it just kind of felt like he still had a lot left to give. He was coming off a career year, 45 touchdowns, over 5,000 yards, and one big play to Cooper Kupp down the middle, or else Tampa might be looking at a possibility of going back to back and winning multiple Super Bowls. And I think the ultimate reason why Tom Brady decided he wanted to come back one more season was maybe to, go at it one more time and go out on top, because I truly felt he had one more in him. Maybe not with the roster that was put together for him in present day, but maybe with another team this offseason, because a lot of the talk was, where's Tom Brady going? It wasn't really, is Tom going to retire, based on everything that he had gone through last season just to come back and play.
Right. Exactly. It's definitely the wording really matters here. I know a lot of people are still hesitant. Like, even when I first heard about the news this morning, which actually was from you, it was, you had this moment of like, okay, it's like in Back to the Future. I've seen this before, but this time you're seeing it in the future, not in the past almost. This is 1985 versus 1955. And even if that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, I think this time it's also going to be very for real. Really, given a lot of the end of year circumstances, his divorce from Giselle, worrying about his family, just his overall performance and the way the team is looking. And it might not necessarily be worth adding to his historic career, calling it quits. And that's I think we both see eye to eye on that as sports historians. And so here's my question to you as well. Let's say we go 10 years into the future. How do you think the sports world will view Tom Brady compared to right now?
That's a great question. I mean, the sports world, as you well know, is all about what have you done for me lately? And one thing that we've gotten caught up in as a society in sports is when players retire and they get further and further removed from the game that we love, you start talking about who's great that's playing now. And it's easy to say players of present day are just better than players in the past because, you didn't see the players in the past play live. And as we go further and further down the road, there's going to be younger and younger generations that are watching Patrick Mahomes in year 15 and Josh Allen in year 12. And like these guys, and, looking at them as their legends and not having watched, obviously Brady in the early years as opposed to now. And some people's first impression of Brady was just this season, and it wasn't that great of a season as a whole. They struggled. They did make the playoffs, but there were a lot of holes, and it wasn't his best year compared to some years that he's had in the past. So I do think you go down the road, it's just natural. I don't think it's any sign of disrespect towards Tom Brady, but they're just going to be talking about players and comparing them to Tom Brady. So he will always be brought up in GOAT comparisons as we get further and further down the road. My guess in 10 years probably it'll be Mahomes versus Brady, who's the greatest of all time, because Mahomes is now playing in his third Super Bowl and has a chance to win number 2. So I think it'll be one of those things where, like, we're talking about Michael Jordan right now in the GOAT comparison with LeBron. I think you'll get that same thing with Brady down the road with Mahomes, or maybe another star quarterback that breaks out. So it'll be interesting to see.
Now, here's an alternate, like the other side of that coin. Like you say, what have you done for me lately? Recency bias is a thing. Now, I know a lot of people too, and I'm sure this is the same argument, let's say, for Michael Jordan versus LeBron, or even, I don't know, people who think Babe Ruth is still the best in baseball. You still have the argument where some people just say, this guy was better because he's from when I was growing up. It's sometimes people have that bias from things that have already occurred. Like, you're almost not willing to accept that something new can come along in the history of your sport and surpass what you know personally as greatness. So I would also argue, maybe in a way, and you're absolutely right, recency bias is a big deal. But you almost think maybe it helps Brady over time, because a lot of people just do not want to accept that someone else's, era of sports history is greater than theirs.
Oh yeah, I mean, it very well could. You can definitely use that for example, because also growing up, when you start watching sports, you're kind of told before you're watching, like, by people around you, by people that are fans of sports, like, oh, this guy's the greatest. Like when I was born and I grew up watching basketball, again, it was just told. It was just kind of the conversation. Oh, yeah, Jordan's the best. There's not really a debate. That's it. Hockey, Wayne Gretzky's the best. There's not really a debate. That's just how it is. And when it is like that for so long, it's no longer, it doesn't, even though it is an opinion, it kind of feels like a fact because
Yeah,
everybody kind of
exactly.
thinks in one way or another. And, Tom Brady, in 10 years, I still think will be the greatest of all time. I think I'll still hold the opinion that he is. But it's just pretty remarkable some of the talent that we have in this league today. And, going back to his just announcement this morning, it was at first one of those things to me that was kind of shocking, but the announcement in general, even though it was a year ago, like a year from removed from the last time he made an announcement, it doesn't surprise me, and I don't believe it was a coincidence that he decided to do it today, and not because of the date, but more so because of what had happened in the NFL just over the past 48 hours. We heard a story that broke that the Dolphins weren't interested in pursuing Tom Brady, and that was a possible destination for him. And then Sean Payton decided he was going to agree to terms with the Denver Broncos, and I really believe that Tom Brady, once he saw that Sean Payton decided to go that route, I think he realized his best option at this point was just to hang it up and didn't see himself going to another team that would give him a clear path to winning another title, which I think deep down inside he wanted to accomplish before he was done. And I think that yesterday when Payton agreed to the terms of the Broncos, I truly believe that was Brady. He saw that. And I think that kind of helped him solidify his decision. And it doesn't surprise me that he came out with it today.
Nice. I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of those titles, let's talk about those a little bit. Brady, 7 Super Bowls, more than any team. Remember, the Steelers have 6, the Patriots have 6, 5 Super Bowl MVPs. Didn't check who was second, but I know it's not close to 5. Do you think we'll even see
Yeah, it's
someone come around? Oh, sorry, you were saying.
no, it's pretty remarkable with the amount of championships he won. And I just wanted to make a quick point about the titles for people of other sports that might watch this to put it into perspective. So he's got 7. That's more than any other team. Wayne Gretzky, the great one, had 4 Stanley Cups. There were about 50 NHL players that had more Stanley Cups than Wayne Gretzky, and there were about 119 or so players that had at least 4. So, and we look at him as like the undisputed greatest hockey player ever because of his numbers and how great he was. Tom Brady has more championships than any team. And like you measure that up with other sports, like Jordan has 6, the Boston Celtics have 17, the Lakers have 16, or might be 17 that LeBron got his in Los Angeles. So I think
Or
they
if
have
you
the same
look,
now. I think it is 17. And it's you look at those titles and even the great ones in all these other sports don't have more than other teams, and Brady does, which goes to show you how hard it is to just win even one. He's got 7.
oh yeah,
So I just think that's
and
remarkable.
I feel like in football, when you really do like from the historical lens, one, I know championships matter more in, let's say, football and baseball when you're comparing people in history. Baseball championships don't matter at all. Yogi Berra has 10 World Series rings. He's not even considered the best catcher to ever live. He's top 5, but he's
Right.
not considered the best. Ted Williams is one of the greatest hitters to ever live. Some people say the best, never won a World Series. Gretzky won 4 Stanley Cups. He's considered better than Jean Beliveau, whose name is on the Stanley Cup 17 times, 10 times as a player, 7 times as an executive. But I feel like in this specific case, you have to think it's not like he won 7 and we're on like Super Bowl 130. He has more than any other team. Most players have at most 40% of the championships for their team. Maybe and then I think that's a bit of a stretch when I would say. Or
Yeah.
or like, a third of the, sorry, let me rephrase, a third of the amount for the most ever. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? Like I'm not specifically like
I
the,
follow you.
okay, yeah. Making sure too, because we got people listening in. It could just be like, oh, someone has one of two championships for a team. I mean, in the grand scheme, Brady,
Scheme it. Right.
no, like we will be talking about the fact that Brady has more Super Bowls than a team until a team wins an eighth Super Bowl. And that could be a very long time, despite the fact that a couple of teams only need two.
Right.
Like that's
No, I'm with you. It's New England doesn't look like they're going to be winning two anytime soon with how good Buffalo is and how good Miami is. But again, half the teams that make the playoffs in one year in the NFL don't the next year. So it's one of those leagues that parity just reigns. I mean, not like college football where you get the same four or three teams that are up there every year. NFL parity is just, it's the standard. I mean, every year you're seeing new teams in there. And I mean, in my lifetime, we saw a number of teams get there first. I mean, Seattle got there first, and Philly got there first. Now they're looking for number two.
these
And
just
I
in the
mean, even
last 10
early
years.
on, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just crazy, and it just goes to show how the competitive state of the league today, and it just shows you how hard it is. And most other sports like baseball, hockey, and basketball, they're all series. You can have a bad game. Wayne Gretzky could have a bad game in the finals. So could Jordan. Those guys could have a bad game. If you're a quarterback in a Super Bowl, you can't have a bad game. You
That's
have to
it.
win that game or else you're done.
Yeah. Now, how would you compare how hard it is at this point in time in football, given that Brady's won seven compared to in years past? Montana won four, the Dolphins won two in a row, the Steelers won four in a decade. Do you feel that at any other point in the history of football, parity was even close to what it is now, or are we seeing what's becoming more of a trend?
So I do think that one thing I can say as far as the game and evolving is that you got to have the offensive coach nowadays. A defensive coach is only going to take you so far. If you look at the two head coaches in this year's Super Bowl between the Eagles and the Chiefs, both offensive head coaches. If you look at the conference championship games, you throw in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, and you throw in Cincinnati with Zach Taylor. Both of those guys, offensive coaches. You even go back one more round. Jacksonville Jaguars with Doug Peterson, another offensive guy. So like you just have all these teams that are offensive-minded head coaches, and those are the guys that are succeeding today. Defensive coaches usually succeed when they not only have a good defense, but they're able to find the right offensive coordinator. And if you're able to find that guy will inevitably get hired for a head coaching job in the future. So then that defensive coach has to go back and replace that coordinator. And replacing that is easier said than done. Dan Quinn got fired from Atlanta because he couldn't replace Kyle Shanahan. And there's been a number of guys. It'll be interesting to see if Dan Campbell might be next with Joe Johnson, Ben Johnson from Detroit. He's staying for one more year, but if he decides he wants to leave, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I am going a little bit off topic here as far as coaching and succeeding in the playoffs. We get that it's challenging, but
Yeah.
back to Brady. I wanted to point this out. I just thought this was really weird. I woke up this morning about 15 minutes after I woke up. That's when the news broke that Tom Brady announced his retirement over Twitter. And I don't know why. I woke up this morning, and for whatever reason, the first thought that came to my mind was, I wonder when Tom Brady is going to make a decision on if he's going to play or go to another team or whatever. And then like literally 15 minutes later, I got my answer, which is
Yeah.
so weird because when I
You
thought
wanna
of it, I thought nothing of it.
you know what though how Brady approached it kind of reminds me of? Just when you think about the different ways people have made announcements over the years. Remember how the different ways LeBron announced he was going to different teams? Like first one was an hour-long television special, got a lot of hype. Next one was a Sports Illustrated article, and then the last one was just, all right, this is what I'm doing in a tweet. Like it kind of feels
Right.
like Brady went from the first version of his retirement was this massive media hype. Oh, even though he didn't say anything. And the second one was just him in a little short video on the beach saying, "Hey guys, I'm done for real. Thank you, everyone. Love you." Mwah. And that was it. Like you almost feel like the older play it almost feels like there's a trend where the older players get, the less they want like just the big announcement. They just want to be able to say, all right, my legacy, peace out.
Oh yeah, and I think part of it is, and remember, like, what was it, like a week and a half ago, he was on the podcast and he didn't know what he was going to do, and Jim Gray asked him about his future, and then he kind of snapped at him. He's like,
Mhm.
if I knew what I was going to do, I would have done it already, pretty much in the PG version. But and I think part of that was he was waiting on some decisions to be made. He was waiting on certain teams and coaches to kind of, decide what they were going to do and, see what rosters were going to look like at the end of the season. And I think after a little bit, he kind of realized that. I think it was one of those things where it felt like, well, I guess I have to retire. I think deep down, part of him really wanted to go out on top. And I think it just took him a little bit to accept that that may not be his story, even though it has been for other players like
Yeah,
Michael
it was for
Strahan
Peyton
and Peyton
Manning.
Manning and Ray
Yeah.
Lewis. It was. And not really because of what Manning did. I mean, Manning was an all-time great, but he
He
was
wasn't the one
surrounded
who
by,
won that Super Bowl in, was it
yeah,
2015?
yeah, 2015 Super Bowl 50. I know it seems like
It
forever
feels like
ago
it
now,
is
but
forever. I mean, if you think about it,
yeah,
it's 8 years ago now.
it's crazy. It's
Like you're at
absolutely
a point
crazy.
where really it's been a few years if you really want to review like how long it's been. We're not going to get into that now. But let
Right.
me jump into a couple of topics just to really make sure we get some history stuff in there. First part, let's do three Brady great moments and three Brady not so great moments. What would you say if you had to say right off the top of your head now, Brady's three greatest moments?
Wow. That's a loaded question. That's a great question. Three of his greatest moments. I'm going to keep it on the field. I'm going to keep it with some of his play. Um, to me, and one of them I think is more unpopular than others. I really was impressed with his performance in Super Bowl 52. Now, for those who don't know much about that game, it was the Patriots versus the Eagles, and it was with backup Nick Foles and Doug Pearson, and those guys were playing with nothing to lose. And that game was a back and forth game. The Patriots scored 33 points. Tom Brady threw for over 500 yards. And I would argue it was probably his best game ever, his best Super Bowl ever. I think it goes without saying. But he lost. And it really shows you, like, sometimes as great as you are, you need to have a good team around you to win games. And I think that to me was one of his three greatest moments, even though he didn't win that Super Bowl, to just play the way he did down the stretch of that season and even in that game to come up short. I think that is probably number three for me on my top three. Number two, I think, man, that's great. I think number two is the 28-3 comeback. I think that one was absolutely
After so you
great.
have the 28-3 after a losing Super Bowl.
Right. So no,
Interesting.
like number three is the bottom. Number two is like I'm going
Oh,
three
okay,
up.
okay,
So
okay.
like one will be the best.
Okay. You're doing a
Yeah.
countdown. Got it, got it.
So number three would be that one. Number two would be 28-3 comeback. I mean, that is like you can just talk about the numbers and the stats in that game. You can just talk about, well, it just doesn't happen. Like it doesn't. And they pulled it off. But if you go back and watch that game, I mean, Brady wasn't like amazing. Like he made some plays when they had to be made, but I went back and watched that game, and that game kind of gets glorified because of just like the sheer amount of points they had to overcome. But a lot went right, like the Edelman catch. A lot of things went their way in the second half. Plus, Atlanta kind of did some things to self-destruct. That's why, for me, that's number two and not number one. But it's still the greatest comeback in playoff history, Super Bowl history, in my opinion.
And it's the only
So
overtime in Super Bowl history as well.
yeah. And then number one for me would probably be the '07 season. I know they lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl, but when you set the touchdown record in the single season, now it has been broken by Peyton Manning since then. But at the time he broke it was 50, and they were undefeated. People just don't get how hard that is to do. I mean, the Dolphins did it when they were like 12 teams in the league, and it was 14 games. The Patriots went 18-0, made it to the Super Bowl, and they were a few plays away. I mean, they were Ellis
Lost
Hobbs,
by
I
a
believe it
score.
was. They were an Ellis Hobbs, I believe that was the corner. They were an Ellis Hobbs interception away from winning that game. The Giants were putting together their game-winning drive, and Manning threw this ball near the sideline. People forget it went right through Hobbs' hands, and he put his hands on his helmet, and the Giants can continue to prevail and made the huge play with the helmet catch of Tyree. It took some miraculous things to even beat them on that day when they weren't at their best. So I think that to me is the number one Brady moment in the grand scheme of things, because I just don't think, even though they lost it that year, I don't think that's going to be done for a long time.
Yeah. It is actually fascinating that you were listing two Super Bowl losses in his top three moments. Like, I do agree, the undefeated parts. That's if they had won, they're the greatest team of all time. But because they're not,
Ever.
NFL Network put them at 7, which I
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
Even if they might have beaten the other teams, all things being equal. But think about it with Brady. He's won not, he won the first Super Bowl ever for New England, but he's won all of them.
Yeah.
He won 2 out of 3 with a Bucks one sandwiched in between.
Yeah, we got to throw that in there, of course.
Of course I have to. And then he took a massive break, and then had the second half of his career where he beat the defending Super Bowl champion Seahawks. That one required some luck too, including Russell Wilson throwing in the end zone.
And I wanted to point out there that Super Bowl is, in my opinion, we'll talk about that in another episode when we talk more about the Super Bowl, but that game, Brady was absolutely superb. I mean, I would argue that that game that Brady played was actually a better performance by him than the one when they came back down 28-3. The 28-3 is just more cinematic and it's a better story. I think that the way Brady played in that game against Seattle, down, by 2 scores in the second half, and he rallied that team together. It was something spectacular, because that Seattle team a year before that whooped high octane offense in Peyton Manning, when Peyton Manning probably had his best year ever, and they couldn't score but just 8 points, I think it was. And Brady the next year beat pretty much that same team. Got a little help, but even if, let's say, they lost that game, they didn't get blown out. They were in it all the way to the end.
And here's the thing too. No one wins anything without a little help.
No,
You have it where with the Steelers back in the 70s, you needed the immaculate reception to go on to get to where they got and win the Super Bowl. One of them again was, not running the ball with Seattle. Just think of all the great moments in sports, and someone's going to get a little help. The Yankees in 96, part of being the Orioles was that a fan stuck his arm over and pulled it out of the air and was declared a home run. Maybe the Orioles win that game otherwise and changes the whole series. It's fun to look back and see like how, even if someone was that great, you need a supporting cast. Gretzky had one, Jordan had one. Look at Mike Trout not having one. And then think about, those two things. I lost my train of thought there for a moment. But moving on to Brady's 3 biggest, I guess we could say, blunders to wrap up this conversation.
Yeah, and no, 3 biggest. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, there's 3. I'm not going to call them blunders. I'm not going to call them blunders. I'm going to call them low points for his career. And
low points are fair.
Number one, the reason why I don't want to call it a blunder, I think it's just more of a low point, is because 2008, I mean, they had the perfect season, they lost, and then week 1 the next year he gets hurt and tears his ACL. And at that point, Tom Brady was kind of viewed as like immortal. Like he really didn't have a lot of injuries, like maybe some minor ones here or there, but not any that sidelined him for a long period of time. So the 2008 season, him not being able to play, when he was arguably at the peak of his game, was, really tough, and I mean, the Patriots still won like 10 games without him, but if they had him, who knows, they might have been able to repeat that perfect season and maybe actually do it that time. We'll never know, that's just something we'll have to put in the can for, the hypothetical. So that's probably one for me. Another one would probably be, and this one is like an individual game, when he joined the Bucks, that first home matchup against the Saints was really that tough to watch. I mean, that was
one of his only scores was a QB sneak up the middle, and then the rest.
Yeah, and the game. Yeah, and the game was over. Like Sean Payton and Drew Brees ran circles around Tampa, and it wasn't even remotely close. And that was just an embarrassing game. And then the third one is even smaller. I'm not even going to call it a game. It's going to be one thing. He forgot what down it was. 4th down. He thought it was third. He put up the fingers, and everybody was like, Bruce Arians tried to deny it. We all knew he forgot, but it's just how it goes. And it's just one of those things where, yeah, I mean, even the greats can have something like that happen, you know. So he forgot what down it was. So even the greats can have that thing happen. I did want to touch on this other point really quickly that we were talking about, you know, who, you know, what sports care about championships and what don't. It's to me, I've kind of looked at it where it's like, you know, in baseball, I completely agree with you. I think that, you know, championships, you know, you can win them. Nobody's talking about legacies based on how many they have. I think in football, it really only matters to the quarterback. Believe it or not, at the end of the day, nobody's asking how many rings Joe Thomas had, and nobody's asking how many rings,
That's a very
say,
good
you know,
point.
Ray Lewis had. I mean, even though he did win a couple, it's not like that's not in the argument. And, you know, nobody's talking about kickers, how many championships they have. It's just really, can you win if you're the quarterback? Can you win if you're the coach? Those are the two in football to me. Basketball, it's everybody. It's literally every star. Like, they're not really running them for role players because you're not comparing them to some of the best. But when it comes to star players in the league, it's all about championships. And then for hockey, I actually don't know as much about how much championships are valued in
Hockey
that
really
league, but I
does.
know that obviously
I
you
would
win
say
them, it's definitely going to
hockey,
help
it
the
doesn't matter
legacy.
that much. I mean, like it does. I'm sure if Gretzky never
Right.
won won a Stanley Cup, it would be a big blemish on his career. But when you think about some of the greatest, like Lemieux's up there, he only won two. Bobby Orr won maybe one or two.
Right.
And the guys who won 10, like Henry Richard, won like 11. And, you know, he's just considered one of the better Montreal Canadiens players. And just want to ask you one last question. And you mentioned it's very quarterback specific when you
Sure
talk about
thing.
like who's one of the best in football. Why do you think it's quarterback specific compared to others, especially because like I know the quarterback nowadays is the most important position, but it hasn't always been that way. It used to be a fullback, or sometimes people used to say
Right.
defenses win
Running back. Yeah.
championships. Why do you think that is?
Well, you know, obviously back in the day, you're right. You touched on fullback, running back. I mean, let's go through football in general, right? The Heisman Trophy, if you've seen the trophy, what does it look like? It doesn't look like a quarterback throwing the ball. It's a running back running the ball. So yeah, back then running back was the position. Nowadays, it is all about the quarterback. And I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, greats winning championships in the league, they start with the quarterback because A, those are the players on the team that make the most money. So you make the most money, you're going to be in the spotlight. You're touching the ball on every play. Not everybody else is. You know, some receivers are getting it sometimes, running backs are getting it sometimes. The defense might get forced to turn over here or there, but you're outside of the center. You're the only other player that is touching the ball on like virtually every play. So it's just one of those things where all eyes are pretty much on you, and the teams will go as you go because if you don't have the quarterback right, we've kind of all seen what teams look like without a good quarterback. So we know based on watching the game how important it is. I mean, let's just take the NFC Championship this past week for an example. The San Francisco 49ers lost Brock Purdy, went to their next quarterback, and then he got hurt, and they didn't have a quarterback to throw the ball. So they brought in Brock Purdy as like a decoy and ran the ball the rest of the game. Even though they were down, there was nothing they could do, and they were out of the game because they couldn't throw the ball to get back in it. So it's very clear, even just this past weekend, you have to have a good quarterback to win. And you have to have at least a healthy one, no matter how good a coach might be, aka Kyle Shanahan.
Right. I think those are some excellent points, Josh. And I want to thank you for coming on to the second ever Awkward Sports History Talk. It was really happy to have you on. I'm sure we will bring you back again. For everyone who is watching, I thank you for doing so as usual. I will be making more of my usual videos in the future, but until now, I'm hoping you enjoy these Awkward Sports History Talks as they come. And until then, I'm Harrison. Thanks again to Josh for coming on and talking, and we will see you all next time.